sports fans, I have a confession to make. I lost faith in the Celtics on Thursday night. I was watching the game and it really wasn't going very well. Some of the starters were out and they were losing by 27 points. Well, I had a couple of phone calls to make and some books to read, so I shut the TV off and got to work. Just before I went to bed, I thought, well, I'll just see how bad it really was. And I flipped on the television set and they turned it around. They were down by 27 points at halftime and they won the game. They were playing a really good team. And not only was it a great half of basketball, I guess, but it was the largest deficit that the Celtics had, a halftime deficit that the Celtics had ever erased in the course of their long, storied history as a basketball team. So anyway, I was disappointed. Well, I don't really care all that much about basketball, and you probably don't either. But I don't want us to get discouraged. I don't want us to give up and miss the best that God has to offer. So I want to encourage us this morning to hang in there, to stay faithful, to stay engaged. If not with a basketball game, but with something that really matters. During the course of this sermon series, I've shared with you some important ideas and important ways to consider and to think of the nature of God. And I hope this morning that I can kind of conclude some of that and find ways to incorporate that into who we are as a people. I've said that God does not reward us for faithfulness by giving us good things. And the corollary to that is that when we experience difficult things and problems, that is not God punishing us. I've said that God has given to each and every human person the precious gift of free will, that we are called to make our own decisions and to live with the decisions that other people make around us. We spoke, if you remember, of Moses. And how when God called Moses, he wasn't given a lifetime of ease and comfort. But he was given profound challenge. And every challenge that he received and he rose to brought with it another challenge, even more difficult and more demanding. Moses is remembered for the ways in which he rose to those challenges. I have said in these sermons that there is more to prayer than simply asking God for something and sitting back passively, waiting for God to give it to us. Prayer is learning how to live in the presence of God. We spoke of Paul and the unanswered prayer in his life, that he had this thorn in the side and he prayed for God to take it from him, but when it didn't go away, Paul didn't despair. He kept going forward, trusting in God's grace, even if he didn't get the things he expected. Prayer is allowing God to change us from being passive recipients to being actively engaged in the destiny, our own destiny. I've said in a number of ways over these past few weeks that I don't believe God has preordained a set of events, and discerning God's will means we have to figure out what those mysteries are. But that we discover God's will by living in relationship with God, learning as we go, and that God is to us as a caring parent is to an adult grown child. Discernment is shared. This morning I want to affirm that I believe that loving nature of God will eventually triumph, and all that God has willed will eventually come to pass. And so we can be patient as we are faithful. There are a few reasons that I believe God's love will ultimately come to pass. And the first is because God has so many folks to work with. God works with you and God works with me. Most human beings are very compassionate, and when they see a need and they see a concern, their response, for the most part, is a response of generosity and concern, wanting to make a difference. And every now and then, God whispers something into our hearts and our minds, and God calls us to respond to a need, perhaps a need we haven't seen before. One of the reasons I believe God's will prevail is because God has so many allies in so many different people willing to make a difference. God's love will prevail because there are a lot of people involved in bringing it to pass. Another reason I believe God's love will ultimately triumph is because God has the ability to take even our mistakes and to transform them. I used to coach football, and I coached with a coach who was a lot smarter than I and better at it. And I remember one day at football practice, we were teaching these gaggle of 11 boys how to play defense. And there's one position on the field called the safety, where the safety is supposed to hang back. And while everybody else breaks to the ball immediately, the safety is supposed to wait 3 seconds and then break to the ball. And usually you tell them by asking them to take 3 steps backwards. I do it right now, but I'd end up in Roseanne's lap. So one day while we were coaching, I was trying to teach this kid how to play safety, and he just wasn't getting it. Now, when the ball gets in play, take 3 steps back. Okay, coach, I'll do that. The ball's got to play, and he runs to the ball. Come back. I'd say it again. And the next play, he'd do it again. He wouldn't take 3 steps back. He'd just break right to the ball, right away. After about 6 times, I started getting frustrated. And I kind of looked over at the head coach and said, gee, what do I do? And he said, just keep telling him. Just keep telling him. So I kept telling him, and finally they had this fake play, and he didn't wait 3 seconds. He ran right to the ball, and all of a sudden the ball went sailing over his head, and there was a touchdown. Before I could get it out of my mouth, this 12-year-old kid came up to me with his kind of head hung a little bit and said, is that why you wanted me to wait 3 seconds? He went on and became a great player. He actually played high school football and was a great player. He got it. He got it. Well, this is the story of one kid who just didn't get it. no matter how many times I explained it, it wasn't until it happened that it became real. And that's what God does with us, with the mistakes we make. God's love will ultimately prevail because God made us in such a way that we don't have to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Love and grace allow us to learn and to grow from our mistakes. In 1955, Emmett Till traveled with his family from Chicago to Mississippi. Emmett Till was 14 years old and he was African American. And while he was in Mississippi, he whistled at a white girl. 3 days after that whistling at the white girl, 4 adults showed up at his uncle's home where Emmett was staying. Beat him so bad, his face was unrecognizable. Shot him and dumped his body in a river. A horrible, tragic, sinful. You know what his mother did? His mother refused to close the casket at his funeral. She wouldn't hide the ugly. She wouldn't let us pretend it didn't happen. And by keeping that casket open, the reporter took a picture, and the picture made its way onto all of the papers in our nation. And maybe that was part of what got us all off our collective rumps and started to do something about the sin and the scourge of racism that has harmed so many. We belong to the God of resurrection power. And in this resurrecting God, the worst word is never the last word. The most horrific is never the final scene of the play. God uses mistakes. God takes what is sinful and cruel and transforms it. And Emmett became a vision of what was wrong. And his death became a call to renewal. God's love triumphed, even in that horrific moment. Well, what does this mean for us? We who gather here on this day, it means that there's nothing to be gained by repeating our own mistakes over and over again. There is a prevailing love that can and will transform us. And it means that there's nothing to be gained by passively sitting back and accepting trauma. It means that we are to do whatever we can to bring our brokenness and our struggle into the light of God's grace. It means we are to trust that the worst will never, ever, ever be the last. It means that we can do with our own lives what Jesus did with his own death. He could not stop the Romans from executing him. He could not stop the betrayal that happened all around him. He couldn't even keep his disciples' attention while he was being arrested and executed. But Jesus is remembered as someone who did not despair at the worst. At some level and for some reason, he was able to trust that even through death, something powerful, something miraculous would unfold. Wesley is one of the theologians I enjoy reading. And he wrote long ago about an image of God's triumphant love. He said that the love of God is like water on the top of a hill. And there is nothing you can do that will prevent that water from getting to the bottom. You can divert it. You can delay it. And even if you successfully dam it up, it'll evaporate and come down the stream. You just can't keep water from flowing downhill. And you just can't keep the love of God from making its mark and its difference in the world. You can delay it if you don't respond. You can dam it up by not using your free will in a responsible way. You can frustrate it, but you can't stop it. You can't stop it. If the ideas that have been a part of our worship over this past month have been important to you, and I believe that they have been because many of you have told me what a difference these sermons have made in your own understanding of your own faith. But if it makes a difference for you, I'd like to invite you to consider doing whatever you can to help us as a church share these ideas. You know, I mean, it's all well and good to gather in this room and think these thoughts and share these things, but it's a big world out there. And if you think that these ideas are important, can you be a part of disseminating them beyond the comfort of this sanctuary? Can you get involved and find a way? Not just to keep an institution chugging along, but to say these important things to people who would benefit from hearing them. We'll start a membership class next week, and if you'd like to be a part of that, I'd love to have you join us at 4 o'clock on Sunday. Your financial support allows us to do the ministries that express these types of values. And so many opportunities for leadership and engagement exist. If these matter to you, and I believe that they do, won't you allow that grace to energize you as servants, not recipients of it, but a bearer of it to a hurting world?